Shazaam is a 1994 movie starring stand-up comic and comedian Sinbad, in which he plays a genie who comes under the control of a young child named Max. Shazaam tells Max that he belongs to him until he grants Max 3 wishes. Max wants to use the genie's magic to rebuild his relationship with his divorced father, while his mom is ready to marry her firefighter boyfriend, Travis. We all hate Travis. The genie, however, is more interested in becoming a music sensation than helping Max with his relationship with his father. It's a whole barrel of fun that the whole family can sit down and enjoy. Except you can't, because it's not real. I really tried here, guys. I tried so hard to find this movie. It seemed absolutely impossible to me that it couldn't exist. I had never personally seen it or remembered seeing it, but so many people on the internet were so adamant about the fact that this movie was real and that they had personally seen it with their own eyes. So I had to try, right? But despite my efforts, from the moment I made my first search, I was being barraged with article after article stating the same exact thing. Not only did this movie never exist, there seemed to be this idea that permeated throughout each source I searched, each new turn resulting in a fresh dead end that indicated that there may be something supernatural occurring here. I mean, how else could such a large amount of people have such a vivid memory of something that never even happened? It doesn't make any sense. This has to be some kind of cover-up, right? I mean, Sinbad has to be in on this. He has to be the one who paid these people off, and if that's the case, he has to be insanely powerful. If George Lucas wasn't able to wipe every copy of the Star Wars Holiday Special off of the face of the earth, but Sinbad was somehow able to eradicate any mention of this movie from newspapers, archives, and any physical media. He has to be one of the most powerful men in existence, right? Anyway, this seems like a really good time to talk about Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela served as the first president of South Africa between 1994 and 1999. He was a central figure in ending apartheid in South Africa and served 27 years in prison for crimes against his unjust government. Mandela was released from prison on February 11th, 1990, 4 years before he would take the office of president. Nelson Mandela would pass away on December 5th, 2013 due to complications from a respiratory infection. But something strange happened in the days following his death. There were hundreds of discussions on Reddit, which as a socially stunted 15-year-old was where I spent most of my time, where people swore up and down that they had sworn Nelson Mandela had already died while imprisoned in South Africa in the 1980s. These people didn't just remember his death, they remembered several days worth of funeral coverage and even speeches from his associates and his widow. This strange phenomenon of many people seemingly having vivid memories of something that never actually happened had been recognized 4 years prior by paranormal investigator, writer, and researcher Fiona Broome, who launched MandelaEffect.com in 2009. As the story goes, Broome states that she realized that she had had this memory quite some time ago, but when she was corrected, she chalked it up to a faulty memory and moved on. However, in 2009, she was a guest speaker at DragonCon. As she sat in her VIP room waiting for her turn to speak, she was having a conversation with the head security manager of the convention, a man named Shadow. I wasn't able to find details of this conversation, but Broome tells the story herself in the video, What is the Mandela Effect Anyway?, on one of her YouTube channels.
It was during one of our 2009 conversations that DragonCon's chief of security, called Shadow, joked, "This conversation reminds me of people who remember Nelson Mandela dying decades ago." That got my attention because I was someone who had one of those memories, but I'd never mentioned that memory to anyone else because it seemed so weird, and I'd never found an explanation for it. That conversation attracted the interest of other people in the green room. I have no idea which one of us first used the phrase Mandela Effect, but it was certainly easier than repeatedly saying, "People who remember Nelson Mandela dying years ago." After that conversation, I spoke with one of my book editors. She suggested that we start a website about it to see if there was much interest. At that time, I thought that odd Mandela memory was one of a kind.
The channel MandelaEffect.com is owned by Broome herself and was launched in September of 2023. Broome states in her blog that she did this to bring back discussions surrounding the Mandela Effect, since the website she launched in 2009 has now become defunct. The Mandela Effect, of course, gets its name from the primary inciting incident that led to its discovery, I guess. I'm using that word very loosely. However, there are dozens of different examples of this you can find online, with the most popular ones that you've almost certainly already seen being Berenstain Bears, The Fruit of the Loon Cornucopia, Febreze, Looney Tunes, Pikachu's Tail, Curious George's Tale, The Monopoly Man's Monocle, Fruit Loops, Oscar Mayer, and a certain movie about a certain celebrity playing a genie. You see where I'm going with this. But how does something like this happen? First, it's important to understand how our memories are actually stored inside of our brains. In an article for Discover magazine, Aamodt writes about the Mandela Effect, as well as how information is stored in our brains. I highly recommend reading it yourself since it's absolutely worth the read. But essentially, the science of memory goes a little something like this. Our memories are stored in collections of neurons within our brains, and the location of a memory within our brain is called a memory trace. Our brains make determinations for exactly which information will be transferred from areas suited to storing temporary information, such as the hippocampus, to more permanent storage areas, such as the prefrontal cortex. When we learn something, a framework begins to be built in our brains, and from that framework, our brains do this amazing thing where they store similar memories and information in close proximity within this framework. This is called a schema. It's like having different files in your computer or your phone to make organization easier. This compartmentalization of information makes it easier for us to recall our memories. When we recall a memory, we're reactivating the neurons that make up that exact memory trace, and this can spur them to form new connections in our brain that perhaps weren't there before. It's like how when you use a search engine and when you get further to the bottom, you begin to find results that are less and less relevant to your topic. After the recalling of a memory, the wires in our brain stop firing and the memory is reconsolidated. Aamodt states that over time, this process of reconciliation can reinforce learning over time because it strengthens our neural pathways. But after a while, some of the more relevant information or smaller details we don't utilize from these memories can get a little bit blurred. This provides us with a pretty reasonable explanation for most, if not all, of the Mandela Effect scenarios that people seem to remember. For example, Nelson Mandela obviously did not die in prison in the 1980s, but Steve Biko, another South African anti-apartheid activist who was imprisoned without trial and beaten by prison guards, died in his cell in 1977. This case was news all around the world, and even President Carter made a statement regarding Biko's death. So for the people who were actively reading the news coming out of South Africa, or even hearing it in passing in the 70s and through the 90s, those similar neurons were firing every single time their brains accessed that information. And so what does this have to do with the Sinbad genie movie? Fucking everything, dude. Haven't you been paying attention? Everything. It has everything to do with it. 3 years ago, Reddit user u/TrueJacksonVP found this 35mm slide from 1994 on eBay. These images show Sinbad dressed up in what appears to be a genie outfit. So could this be it? Did I actually find some kind of physical evidence that this movie existed? Of course not. I already told you this movie doesn't exist. Try to keep up. Come on, let's go. This outfit actually comes from Sinbad hosting a Sinbad the Sailor movie marathon on television. It's not from an actual movie. However, this forms the basis for our debunking, because 2 years later, in 1996, Sinbad starred in a movie called The First Kid, in which he is a Secret Service agent assigned to guard the teenage son of the president. That same year, Shaq stars in a genie movie titled Shazaam. So if you're someone who was alive in the 1990s, even with only snippets of each of these things stored in the recesses of your memory, isn't it possible that those same neurons that are storing this information as close together as it is, endlessly reconsolidating your memories and attempting to make them more efficient, that the wires just got crossed? Our memories and our brains are fickle, and we've barely scratched the surface on what sort of information gets stored deep in our minds and how that information is physically accessed by our bodies. But we do know one thing. Our brains notoriously suck at recalling small details that we haven't made an effort to remember. It doesn't make you a worse or more inferior person to forget things or realize that you got the wires crossed on something. It's completely normal, and it's a much easier and simpler answer to these sort of things than the crazy theories you'll find on the Mandela Effect subreddit. No, you didn't cross into another timeline where things are slightly different. You were just a stupid kid who was only half paying attention to the world around you, or a burnt out adult hearing conversations or the news in passing as you went about your day doing other things that were more important. Everything's fine. There's no glitches in the Matrix. You're gonna live, buddy, okay? I will say though, the Berenstain Bears and Fruit of the Loom Cornucopia really got to me. The Berenstain Bears one can be easily explained because apparently there's a lot of bootleg media out there that has an incorrect spelling of the name, so that might be where some of the confusion comes from. And there's other rational explanations that we can make up for all of this stuff. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to my channel, giving me a like, or leaving me a comment. Let's keep growing this community, baby. That's all I'm saying. As always, guys, my name is Isaiah, and thank you so much for watching my video.